Hey guys, you're listening to Metal Matters, a weekly Jimi radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hill. If you like metal, punk, hardcore, or anything extreme, you've come to the right place. So subscribe and never miss out. This week, we have Jay Bennet as a guest and co-host. We're going to be discussing Van Halen's debut record. How you doing, Jay?
Very well, sir. And yourself?
Under the circumstances, I'm doing well. And
I'm
glad to be able to talk to you about this record because Van Halen is one of my all-time favorite bands.
Absolutely, man. I couldn't agree more. I love me some Halen, and I live very close to and have some good friends over in Pasadena, which is also known as Van Halen country in these parts.
We're also going to talk a little bit about Fair Warning, which is, I think that probably should go down as one of their classic records, but I think that you have to give respect where respect is due. And since this record is probably one of the strongest debuts out of any band and also has a ton of hits on it, might edge out Fair Warning just a little bit because though I love that record, there wasn't like the commercial power on that record that was displayed on the Van Halen debut record. Yeah,
that is true. I in going back and like preparing for this, I was because I was 1 year old when this record came out. What I didn't realize was that the first single released from Van Halen 1 was actually You Really Got Me, the Kinks cover. I didn't realize that, which seems like such an odd way to introduce. I mean, I guess I can. I take it back. I don't understand why they did it. I know that I had read that Eddie Van Halen's choice was Janie's Crying, and to me that makes way more sense. Ain't Talking About Love, of course, which they eventually did release as a single. But I was shocked to learn that it came out as a single before the album. And I have to say, the covers on Van Halen 1, Ice Cream Man and You Really Got Me, are my least favorite tracks. I prefer when Van Halen does originals.
Yeah.
And which is also the reason, incidentally, that I don't like Diver Down. It's like half covers.
Yeah, totally. That's definitely on the bottom of the list for me is Diver Down. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like I said, it's all covers. But So anyway, let's run down some of the particulars about the record before we get into the breakdown of everything here. So Van Halen 1 was released on February 10th, 1978.
Yeah.
Recorded August 30th through September 1977, came out on Warner Brothers and was recorded at Sunset Sound Recorders in Hollywood, California. And this little bit of information is interesting because it was produced by one Ted Templeman, who had worked with the Doobie Brothers, as well as Montrose, which features Sammy Hagar, who would later, as we all know, join Van Halen.
Yeah, so interesting connection there. Yeah,
there's a little foreshadowing with the plot there,
Yeah, exactly.
And though most people probably know this already, the personnel on this record was Eddie Van Halen on guitar, Alex Van Halen on drums, David Lee Roth vocals, Michael Anthony on bass and backing vocals. And I have to say, Michael Anthony is probably one of the most underrated backing singers in rock history, in my opinion.
That's absolutely true, man. And I think as a little kid getting into this record, I always associate Van Halen with MTV,
Yeah.
And that's how I was kind of introduced to them. I probably heard them on the radio, but it really kind of like gelled for me seeing them on MTV, And of course, when you're a kid, you don't appreciate something like you see the showmanship and you can appreciate that as a little kid, but you're not kind of drilling down to the details like Michael Anthony's backing vocals, which really make it for so many of the songs, really tie the room together, you might say. And it's a shame that it seems like, from what I can gather, that Eddie Van Halen has kind of tried to diminish his role, I guess, in later years. That's kind of a drag. But I like that both Diamond Dave and Sammy Hagar have gone out of the way to kind of stick up for Michael Anthony. So I appreciate that,
Yeah, totally. I mean, especially when they drop into those choruses, his voice really contrasts the sort of gruff, gravelly voice that David Lee Roth has, and it just, I thought, even as a young kid, I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I didn't really quite know how to articulate that when I was listening to this as a young lad. But, so the program length, the record is 35 minutes and 34 seconds long, which
perfect
sits right perfectly well into that, late 70s, 80s long playing record format. And side one, we have Running with the Devil, Eruption, You Really Got Me by the Kinks.
Yep.
And talk about love, I'm the One. And then side two kicks off with Jamie's Crying into Atomic Punk, Feel Your Love Tonight, Little Dreamer, Ice Cream Man, the other cover, and On Fire.
Yeah. Yep.
And what's interesting, it's like talking about what you mentioned earlier is that they chose a cover, and not only was it a cover, but it's not even an obscure song. I mean, the Kinks had a fucking hit with this song in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bizarre choice, and I have to say, it's probably one. I actually still listen to the radio a lot. I'm probably one of the few people who still listens to like the commercial hard rock like station that plays like 70s and 80s stuff.
Yeah.
I will, as a rule, I never change Van Halen. If Van Halen comes on, I love it. I'm psyched. I turn it up, except for this song. I don't need to hear this ever again. Their cover of You Really Got Me. I don't like when Van Halen do covers. I don't like that song.
Well, I mean, the thing is too, it's like, this is the era of bar bands basically. And Van Halen was, I mean, and they actually were criticized about this by some of the press when this record came out, is like, a lot of the snarkier journalists that were maybe writing for the cooler magazines like the Village Voice or Rolling Stone, they were embracing more like the punk and new wave world, which was happening around that time. Would often, they made comments about how Van Halen was the best bar band in LA or something like that. And,
right.
And back then, it was about making money. I mean, if you were a local band, you did a covers set. You had, a whole itinerary of covers that you played, and you were entertaining people and probably playing multiple sets a night. And, a lot of these bands, Van Halen comes to mind, Twisted Sister, they all had a covers catalog that they did. And I guess that I imagine even on Diver Down, a lot of that material, they probably were playing for like 15 years at that point,
No, totally. But here's what blows my mind, though. As you mentioned, like, it wasn't an obscure Kinks song. It was a hit, And if you go back and kind of go back into the history of Van Halen, and you can find this stuff on YouTube, they covered, like, Van Halen covered Budgie and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if you think about how, like, someone, I think you and I are probably of the same generation who discovered Budgie through Metallica doing covers of them in whatever it was, 87. Garage Days EP. I mean, imagine if Van Halen had covered Budgie on this record instead of the Kinks. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, that was when Budgie was still like active and good. Yeah. I mean, it would give them an even more an even bigger boost than it did when Metallica covered them, and they could have it might have changed the direction of Budgie in a way. It could have changed their careers, but instead we get a Kinks song. I mean, granted, Van Halen's version is like considerably more, exciting, I guess you could say. But I don't know, man. I don't know why they did that.
Yeah, it's puzzling because I remember even as a kid, back, I was like 12, I think, when I heard this record. So it's like, yeah, it was familiar to me when I first heard it. You know what I mean? And I was like,
Yeah.
huh, where have I heard, you're a kid. It's a small world. It's not like now where kids can go to Spotify and dial up anything, and back then it's like the input of stimulus that was coming at you was limited by the radio and the television. And then occasionally people would play you songs of bands that they liked. And out of the kids that I knew, the Kinks were not a band that we listened to. We were into like Sabbath and like Led Zeppelin, Rush, AC/DC, Van Halen, know.
Right.
But I did hear this song by the Kinks somewhere, because when I heard the Van Halen version of it, I was like, this sounds so familiar. And then sure enough, I was able to ask around, because, you couldn't go on the internet and look it up. And someone, an older guy, the same guy who actually played me this Van Halen record, played me the Kinks version of the song too. I mean, this guy was like considerably older. He was one of my buddy's sister's fiancés who was living at this house. Right. And he had this mammoth record collection. He had all the stuff that formed the way I listen to music can basically be traced back to this one guy. And that one summer that he lived in this house, and we would go and hang out, and he'd always be cranking the best music. And he was like, oh yeah, this sounds familiar, probably because he might have saw it on TV or whatever. And he played me the original. And I was like, man, this is like fucking totally lame. It's like, come on. Yeah. This is like, what is this? It's like some old shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's how I felt. That's how I felt at the time too. I obviously have a much greater appreciation for the Kinks now.
Yeah.
But at the time, as a little kid, it's like, that's like old people music. I didn't want to hear that. And I didn't even want to hear, as much as I love Van Halen, I didn't want to hear them do it either.
Yeah, no, totally. But yeah, so let's just run down the singles real quick. Cause since we're talking about it. So the first single was You Really Got Me with B-side Atomic Punk.
One of my favorites.
Oh yeah. That's definitely one of my favorites. And that's, January 1978. Running with the Devil with Eruption as the B-side. 78.
Pretty outstanding right there. Pretty outstanding.
Actually, it's funny, man. Like we listened to this first record, like as it in order, basically. Dude put the vinyl on and we listened to it. And Running with the Devil didn't really grab me, and because if you listen to the first side, it kicks off a Running with the Devil, then it goes into Eruption, right? Running with the Devil, I'd heard so much about Van Halen's incredible guitar playing, Eddie Van Halen. That song doesn't really display much of his ability, and it's like a cool song, but he doesn't really shred in that song. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think it's kind of I appreciate the restraint on that song because it kind of showcases their songwriting a little bit. I love that song.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know this. I kind of did a little research getting ready for this, and I found out. So apparently that sound that leads into the song, it's car horns, and it's actually the car horns from the band's cars.
Oh wow!
Slowed down by the producer. They somehow slowed it down and controlled it. Ted Templeman made some sort of device where he could he either did it manually with the tape but he had some sort of like a battery powered foot pedal or something where he could set off the horns like himself, like sitting there rather than sitting in the car. That's the sound before the song actually starts. And then apparently the lyrics were inspired by an Ohio Players song that was called Running from the Devil.
Oh, right on, man. Cool.
Yeah, that's where Diamond Dave got it from, the inspiration anyways. So I don't know. That's what who knows? I kind of got that from different places, so that may or may not be totally 100%, legit, but I don't know. Sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, at that time for me, I didn't want to hear anything about restraint or like, fucking guitar, restraint. I wanted like just fucking full on shit all the time. So
yeah,
I mean, that song was cool. And I was like, all right, yeah, this is cool. But like what I heard this guy was like some next level genius guitar player. And, I had just started playing guitar. So I was like really interested in like people displaying their chops. And then, of course, it goes right into Eruption, and my mind was like completely blown. Like I'd never heard anything remotely like that.
Yeah, there's your guitar pyrotechnics right there. I mean, that was the thing. I remember like well into the 90s that was still being referred to as like the benchmark. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. You know?
Yeah.
You know, and though most people give Eddie Van Halen credit for, developing that tapping technique.
Yeah.
Actually, there's two other guitar players that predated him with that technique. One was Steve Hackett of Genesis.
Yeah.
And Harvey Mandel, who played in Canned Heat and the Stones, and he also had a solo career. He played in a lot of records. And,
see, the way I heard that too, but I think the way they distinguished it was that those guys were doing one-handed tapping, and Eruption was the first time that anyone had heard like two-handed tapping, like on a recording.
Really? Okay. All right.
I think that's anyway. That's like the nerd distinction that's made there for that. And apparently, Van Halen, I think in interviews had kind of referenced that they liked that they were into that band Cactus.
Yeah.
And so I found an interview with Carmen Apici, the drummer of Cactus, who says that the beginning of Eruption was actually cribbed from a Cactus song called "Let Me Swim." And then I found another thing where apparently, and this sounds like something Eddie Van Halen would do, part of Eruption quotes a piece by a French composer named Rudolf Kreutzer. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know. I forgot to write down the name of the piece. But that sounds like something Eddie Van Halen would do. And I know they were Cactus fans, so I don't know. I went back and listened to the Cactus thing just briefly, and I don't. Maybe my ears aren't working. I couldn't necessarily hear the connection, but maybe it's there. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That does sound logical because the Van Halen family was a very musical family.
Yeah,
and both of the brothers were involved in like piano and all this other stuff. And it's funny to think that the Van Halen brothers were like a package deal.
Yeah.
They started playing in bands together when they were like in fourth grade, I think.
No, I remember. I read. I'm not a huge fan of the Van Hagar era.
Me neither.
But I do appreciate Sammy Hagar, and I read his book, and he has some great stories in there about his time in Van Halen. But one of which related to what you were just talking about with the kind of inseparableness of the brothers. And he says they'd be practicing in, I think it was Eddie's garage or something, and they were like multimillionaires, and they were still practicing. Like at the time. By the time Sammy Hagar was in the band, they were multimillionaires. They were still practicing in Eddie's garage, right? And so Alex Van Halen would they'd take a break. Alex Van Halen would leave, go to the kitchen, and come back with just two beers, like one for him and one for his brother. Like he wouldn't get a beer for anybody else, like just him and Eddie.
That's fucking awesome, man.
Yeah.
Just maybe a little background. Oh, actually, let's finish going through the singles here. So after Running with the Devil and Eruption, we got Jamie's Crying and I'm the One, and the Jamie's Crying being the single, the A side. Now that's the song that I think we both can agree that would be a red hot lead single for a band's debut record.
Yeah, and apparently it's what Eddie Van Halen wanted.
Yeah.
That was what his choice for the lead single, but Ted Templeman and the record label they wanted the Kinks cover, so that's what we got. Yeah.
The next single was On Fire, with Jamie's Crying appearing as the B-side on that single.
Weird.
That is weird, right? So it came out twice. Once as an A-side, once as a B-side.
So I found some fun facts about both those songs too.
Okay.
This Jamie's Crying thing, I don't know why I never put this together before, but Tone Loc sampled it for Wild Thing in '89.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I don't know why. I don't know why I never made the connection. So, and then with On Fire, apparently even now, On Fire has not been played live by Van Halen since 1984.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, man. I don't know. It seems like, I mean, it's kind of like they jammed it at the end of the record, and like almost like an afterthought, like after Ice Cream Man, which is like the ultimate afterthought.
Yeah.
And so I don't get it. I like On Fire. I think it's like it doesn't get its due. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I think I read some stuff that maybe it was something along the lines of there's some high parts that maybe Dave can't hit anymore.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
But that seems to be the case for a lot of their songs that he keeps doing. So I don't know, you know.
And then the final single was Ain't Talking About Love, A-side with the B-side, Feel Your Love Tonight. And now, all right, if I were to, I mean, obviously, what do I know? I'm not like a world-class record producer or anything, but to me, Ain't Talking About Love would have been a great second single for this record, but it came out at the end of their whole cycle.
Or first single. I love that song, man.
Yeah.
That song, I've heard that song thousands of times at this point, and it never gets old.
I mean, I would say that Ain't Talking About Love is one of my top favorite songs on this record, actually. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That one and Atomic Punks are mine. And Little Dreamer, man. I love Little Dreamer, but I know we'll get to that one. But Ain't Talking About Love and Atomic Punk those are my jams, man.
Yeah.
And Eddie didn't apparently he wrote Ain't Talking About Love in David Lee Roth's parents' basement. And he thought it was like, he kind of wrote it. It's kind of like similar to the story that you hear about Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine. Like Eddie thought it was goofy and didn't show it to the band for a long time. But then ultimately, they ended up recording it. And apparently he still doesn't necessarily hold it in the highest regard, but I think it's one of their best songs,
I do too, man. And you know what I think about all the time when I think about this particular record is it sounds like a bunch of guys playing in a room, like in a practice space or something like that.
Yeah.
The whole vibe is like, I mean, obviously I know the record wasn't recorded this way, but that's a testament to how well Templeman maybe understood the vibe of the band. You know what I mean? That this is a band that's bread and butter is performing live, like they're a bar band, like they're used to playing in front of people in rooms. And to make a record that, by all intents and purposes, sounds very raw to me. To this day, it still sounds like a very raw recording, you know what I mean, with not a lot of production gone into it,
No, totally. That's a great point. And I think, there's two things I think that should be mentioned about that. One is there's a great book. I don't know if you read Van Halen Rising.
No, I haven't.
But I highly recommend it, dude. It's by this guy named Greg Renoff. And it's about Van Halen's early days, pre-Diamond Dave, like basically up through the first record. And it talks about, I mean, they were a band for a long time before they got signed and did a record. So that sort of like bar band mentality is very much, I mean, they're playing huge, massive backyard parties, thousands of people that would get shut down by the cops in Pasadena, playing bars all over the place, multiple sets a night, all that stuff. They had that kind of pedigree that you're talking about. The second thing is that they demoed most of this record, maybe all of it. I have to go back and look at the track listing with Gene Simmons.
Yep. Yeah.
And those, you can find that. It's called Zero Demos. And you can find them. They sound fantastic. They sound great. And some of the songs are just a little bit slightly different than what you hear on the record. So it's kind of cool to hear how they developed,
Yeah, apparently the demo, Gene thought the band had no future as a result of the demo sessions, which I thought was like, wow,
So weird. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. Gene Simmons is, Gene Simmons has been wrong about a lot of things over the years.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I also don't. I love Kiss, and I think Gene Simmons is pretty, underrated as a musician, actually. And I appreciate the things he's done for like Wendy O. Williams, and then he tried, even though he didn't maybe see it with Van Halen. He certainly, I mean, he is credited with quote unquote discovering them in a way.
Yeah.
So he does have, he has a nose for talent and or money. That's for sure.
Also, the thing to note too is that Van Halen, actually, I think that Gene actually took exception to the band calling itself Van Halen. That was one of the things he took exception to as well.
Huh.
They'd actually been through a bunch of different names as they were coming up through the backyard party bar scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
One name was Mammoth.
Yep.
But most interesting to me was they were also entertaining the name Rat Salad.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
was obviously the Sabbath song, and
Sure.
anyone out there could do just a little bit of research and find out that Eddie Van Halen was hugely influenced by Tony Iommi, and had a lot of respect for his songwriting abilities. And both bands actually toured together in '78 more for Van Halen's support of this very record we're discussing right now.
Yeah, and then that was kind of in the waning days of the first Ozzy era with Black Sabbath, and I have not heard. I've read and been told many accounts of that tour. In every one of them, Van Halen wipes the floor with Black Sabbath every night.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine anyone really going on after Van Halen.
Yeah, and I mean, but this is also kind of like, I'm the last person who's going to talk shit about Black Sabbath, but I think at that period, it's safe to say they were all kind of like fat and drunk and like high on fucking blow or whatever else. So they probably, certainly not Ozzy. Those guys were not at the top of their game, and obviously they, they imploded, shortly after that tour.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have nothing but reverence for Sabbath, but you take a shop worn, road weary band like Black Sabbath at that era, all the drug problems, all the whatever personnel issues, and just being on tour so much together, and then you got these young bucks, like this young hungry band who's got one of the guitar world innovators like shredding every night, and some dude with swords like doing backflips, like as the singer. Who the hell is going to go on after them? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, especially if you've been a band for, you've been touring at that level, and like you said, you kind of, I don't know, the energy. I feel like the energy wasn't there for Sabbath, but obviously they recaptured it when Dio joined. That's another story, obviously, but yeah. These things happen.
Yeah, actually, we did a Heaven and Hell Classic Records episode. We talked a lot about those like transitional years with Black Sabbath into the Dio era.
Yeah, that's fun side note. So the guy who did the cover art for Heaven and Hell, his name was Lynn Curley, and I interviewed him years and years ago about Heaven and Hell. He only did one other album cover in his entire career, and it was Blue Oyster Cult's Agents of Fortune. So
I could see the similarities actually in the style.
I mean, but two of the like most iconic record covers of all time, and that's like, I mean, the guy has had a career as a fine artist and an artist for, I mean, that Black Sabbath painting existed before Heaven and Hell. It was he'd done that 3 or 4 years before. But he only did, his work was only commissioned for two album covers, and those were the two. So pretty good track record.
That cover for the Blue Oyster Cult record, I always found that to be like, I can't put my finger on what it is exactly about that record cover, but it's always seemed very sinister to me.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It absolutely is. Yeah. I agree completely. Yeah, great record. And of course, there's a connection there too, because at some point in the 70s, there was the Black and Blue tour, right?
Yeah.
The Oyster Cult and Black Sabbath. I don't know what year that was, but yeah. Probably around the time of those. I think Agents of Fortune was 76, and Heaven and Hell was 80. Something like that, right? So somewhere in there, maybe.
See, now I want to say that it was the what's the one with Burning for You on it by Blue Oyster Cult? Has Veteran of 1,000 Psychic Wars on it.
Yeah,
I think it might have been that record actually for the Black and Blue tour.
Yeah, I can picture it right now, and I can't even think of the name of the record. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to consider about this record is how incredibly successful it was on a financial level for the bands, and to come out of the gates with something like this and crush sales the way this band did, I think is like there was no ramping up period for Van Halen. It's like, I guess you can consider the years they spent with no record deal as the ramp up, but once they got this record together and it was released, it was like off to the races, man. I mean, people embraced this band like incredibly.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's they really. I mean, if you think about it, they really. I mean, the record really changed the face of what everyone was doing. I mean, it kind of launched the whole, what we now call hair metal. It kind of launched that whole thing and the whole guitar hero era. I mean, obviously the guitar playing is phenomenal on here, and it was pretty much unheard of. I mean, Randy Rhoads existed at that time, but he was still playing the Starwood with Quiet Riot. He didn't. No one had really heard him outside of LA until he broke out with Ozzy, which is a couple of years after the first Van Halen record. So Eddie, he gets a lot of credit, and he deserves it. I mean, the guy, the whole. I don't want to sell anyone short. The whole band. I mean, they kind of changed the face of hard rock and metal in a way. I mean, because all that stuff comes from, all your Rats, Motley Crue's, Poison, all that stuff. I mean, none of those bands. I don't think any of those bands would really exist without Van Halen.
Definitely. I mean, they kind of like walked the line between hard rock and heavy metal in a lot of ways. I mean, there's it's not it's not Judas Priest, but there's elements that are similar to Judas Priest, and it's definitely has a heavy dose of rock and roll, and it's not like heavy as like Sabbath was. Right. But I think just the extremity of the way that Eddie Van Halen played the guitar was that projected far into the future. And I would, you mentioned that absolutely they were an influence on the LA, kind of like Hollywood hair metal scene. But I have to say that I listen to Dr. No from the Bad Brains, and I hear fucking Van Halen and his guitar style. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I guarantee you he listened to that to this record. I mean, I think it was hard. I would imagine at the time. I mean, obviously I was a little infant, but I would imagine it was hard to be a guitar player playing any sort of like rock based music, heavier rock type music. Have this record come out and have it not change your way of thinking somehow. Like, even if it was as basic as like, holy shit, what is that guy doing? Like it changed. I mean, the whole mentality shifted when this record came out, and he kind of launched the era of the new style of guitar hero, like the sort of, what maybe had begun with like Clapton or something, and then kind of went several levels up with Jimi Hendrix, and then this again, we have it happening again with Eddie Van Halen, and then ultimately, within a couple of years, Randy Rhoads.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you mentioned Eric Clapton, because Eddie Van Halen cites Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton as being heavy influences on him, specifically Clapton's work in Cream.
Yeah.
That's actually Cream is actually the only band that Eric Clapton was in that I really would listen to. You know what I mean?
Me too. Yeah, absolutely. But I can hear it because in between like the sort of like, pyrotechnic stuff that Eddie Van Halen would do, you can hear the kind of bluesy sensibility that is very much rooted in that kind of Clapton, Jimmy Page style,
Were you aware of a record called Starfleet Project that Eddie Van Halen played on?
No.
Yeah, man. It's Brian May and Friends.
Oh, okay. What year was it?
That's a good question. I'm going to estimate that came out in the early 80s.
Okay. All right. I maybe, okay. That sounds vaguely familiar now that you mentioned Brian May.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a pre like G3 type deal.
Yeah, it's like I talk about this record store a lot on this show, but in my hometown of Carmel, New York, back in the day in the 80s, there was a record store called the Book and Record Store. It's not like, it's pretty much you know what you're in for when you walk in there.
Yeah, you can't accuse them of false advertising.
Yeah, and they had books and records, and it was the only place you could find hard rock, heavy metal. There was like Ramones records in there, Motorhead. I remember seeing Venom, black metal in there. And then the other side of the room, there was all the fantasy and sword and sorcery and horror novels that I, got deeply into when I was a kid. H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard's Conan, Michael Moorcock, like all that stuff. So I remember seeing Starfleet Project because it had this like really sick like album cover that had like rockets and fucking spaceships on it and shit like that. And it was, and then I looked on the back and it was Eddie Van Halen and Brian May, and and some other like dudes that Roger Taylor from Queen also played drums on it too, and just like some other random like studio session guys played on the record too, and it was pretty cool. It was like it sounds extremely dated, obviously, because it was like a side project, and it was done with the intention of making a progressive record. You know what I mean? Like it was longer songs. There was no real hooks on it. It was more of like their interpretation of making like a Yes or King Crimson style record.
So it was boring.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I dig Yes. I like King Crimson. So I have to be in the mood to listen to that stuff. But yeah, it was. It wasn't as good, let's say, as either of those bands because their bread and butter was making that shit. I mean, that was in their soul, making music like that. And Brian May and Eddie Van Halen are incredible musicians, but that's not their calling, really.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I don't mean to shit on Yes or King Crimson. I appreciate both those bands too. I just don't. I appreciate there's certain songs that I really like, but then I just can't. As far as like an entire catalog thing, I just never. They lose me at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to go back. I just found this in my notes here that I mentioned the Tone Loc thing for Janie's Clan. So I found this little bit on the from Classic Rock magazine, their website. So I'm going to read this. This is a quote here. Reportedly, Van Halen's management charged Tone Loc $5,000 for the right to use the sample, but they didn't get permission from the band.
Oh, man.
When the song became popular and the members of Van Halen heard it, they sued for a piece of it. It's believed they received $180,000 in an out-of-court settlement.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
And that was probably right at the spearhead of the whole sampling, battles that were going on.
Yeah, that was 89. So Janie's Crying would have been 11 years old at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. And then another thing that I kind of had forgot or didn't like, I'm the One, which is like the super fast kind of like boogie rock track on the record.
Yeah.
4 Non-Blondes covered it for the Airheads soundtrack.
Wow. What does that even sound like?
I listened to it. It's weird.
I can imagine.
It's weird. Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a good reason that Van Halen plays these songs. I mean, there's many good reasons, but one of them is so you don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, dude. Totally. No one has effectively covered any of their material, really, in my opinion,
Yeah.
However, real obscure. Both Jay and I are familiar with this band La Gratona from Boston, Massachusetts, and they are an incredibly obscure band through no fault of their own because they were a great band. But they covered Atomic Punk and there's a live YouTube clip of them on. There's like a Billy Ruane YouTube catalog, and Billy Ray Wayne was a guy, a man about town in Boston throughout the 80s and 90s who passed away a number of years ago. And he had a video archive of every show that happened within those 2 decades, I think. And La Gratona actually does a pretty good version of the song. I mean, Dana Ambrose is a great guitar player. You know, if there's anyone out there that could pull something like that off, it was definitely him, you know.
That's cool. I want to check that out. That reminds me. So when I first moved to LA, there was a Van Halen cover band called Atomic Punk, and they did only Diamond Dave era, except for they did one Hagar song from 51 to 50. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, the singer and guitar player of Atomic Punk, at least them, maybe the entire band or one other, or the bass player and drummer, I don't know, but definitely the guitar player and the singer went on to be in Steel Panther.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I could see that.
Yeah, and they were quite good, I should add.
Well, I mean, I'm not a fan of Steel. I mean, I know people like that band, and it's just not my cup of tea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but I have listened to hours of their material in the van on tour because some of the members of the rock band I play in enjoy them, so we listen to them in the van, and they're great players, man. I can't take on just a sheer talent level. That band is pretty elite in my opinion, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. They were, I want to find out how many of them were in it. Cause I know for a fact it's the guitar playing, the singer. And I wonder if it's all of them. I'm kind of curious. I want to figure that out. Yeah, they were great, man. They were really good.
That'd be funny if it was the entire band that just became Steel Panther.
Totally.
So, I mean, I could go on and on and on about Eddie Van Halen's accomplishments, and that could be like a whole other episode, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. I think, just one thing I wanted to add, because Little Dreamer, I love that song. And like the opening riff is just fantastic. I think it's one of the most memorable Van Halen riffs.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as we mentioned with Michael Anthony's, when those kind of vocals come in, Michael Anthony, and I think it's Michael Anthony and David Lee Roth together. But it seems like Michael Anthony is almost at the forefront. It might be just him, but when that moment comes in, dude. Man, that song, it's great. I just want to get that in there because I love that song.
He's got the voice of an angel, Michael Anthony.
He really does.
And my favorite thing about that is he's like this burly guy, you know. He's kind of like this, kind of.
Mike, you cut out.
Yeah, Michael Anthony's kind of like this burly dude, you know. Like he doesn't look like the kind of guy that would sing like that.
Yeah, I've met him. He is a burly dude, but he's very short.
Yeah. You would still imagine him having like a different type of voice, though. You know what I mean? As a singing voice.
Yeah. No. Totally.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It does not fit. It doesn't fit with the body type.
Yeah. So one of the things too is we talked about Fair Warning. I mean, I am so antsy to have put this as a classic record, but I had to go with Van Halen's debut over this one, at least for now, because I think that, give respect where respect is due. This was like a powerful debut record for any band. We can cite the facts and figures about how many times this went platinum. It achieved diamond status. The lists, the superlatives, like all the stuff about this record. So that had to be the number one classic Van Halen record, in my opinion. But as far as listening and just emotional impact, I'd have to say that Fair Warning is a very close second to this album. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I would like to mention that Van Halen 1 and Fair Warning are the only two Van Halen records that I own 2 copies of each. Really?
Yeah, I got to have a backup. Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then those are the only all the other ones I just have one copy. These ones, two of each.
This was the first Van Halen record I bought on vinyl, actually.
Yeah.
As a young boy, shoveling snow in the tri-state area winters, the brutal tri-state area winters. I think records were only like $7 or $8 back then, but I remember when this came out, and I was like, oh, I like Van Halen, and I bought this on vinyl, and as a young kid, and then the Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2 I had gotten as on cassette tape, and later purchased those on vinyl as well, and to this day, I actually do not own a version of Diver Down on any format.
Yeah, I bought one way later, like probably within the last 10 years, just because I'm a completist. But I don't really like that record. It's I don't know. Yeah, like I said, it's like half of it's covers. I think a full half of the record is covers. 5 out of 10, I think, are covers. And I'm not into it. Yeah.
Yeah. But some of I think on Fair Warning, there was only maybe 2 songs that actually got released as singles.
Yeah, I guess would have been Mean Street and Unchained, right?
So This Is Love is another song, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. But there's such a list of powerful tracks, just killer songs on this record, man. Mean Streets, Dirty Movies. That's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, what is the story like? What is the story? Why is Dirty Movies in quotes? It's the only song title that's in quotes.
I don't know. That's a good question. And you know what? Maybe there needs to be a follow-up episode on this record.
I think that's a good call.
Because I feel like there's a story here. There's some, maybe you and I can both start working on putting together a, some sort of narrative about this record, because it's such like, for Van Halen, it's like an underground record almost,
Yeah. No. I can dig up some shit on this record for sure. Yeah.
I think we owe it to the listeners.
We should do a separate episode.
Yeah, 100%. But we should do that. We owe it to you guys to do a separate episode on this record, man, because it's such a important record in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
There's like, Hear About It Later. That's like one of my favorite songs, Van Halen songs. Actually, I would say like 4 of the tracks on this record are in my top 10 favorite Van Halen tracks.
Yeah, it's it's pretty phenomenal, man. It's pretty phenomenal. I'm holding my vinyl copy right now. In the inner sleeve, it's got that, that graffiti quote that someone said, "Fair warning, Lord will strike that poor boy down. Turned from hunted into hunter, went to hunt somebody down."
Yeah, see, that's what I mean, man. That's so fucking metal, man. That's like such a brutal like lyric, and it's the only record that is as dark as this. This is their only really dark record they have. Everything else is about like being awesome,
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And of course it's the band's slowest. This is like it definitely sold like incredible, good numbers, but it took like a long time apparently for this record to catch on with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
The artwork was it's called this guy named William Turelek did the art for the record. It was taken from a painting, and it's like
So it's funny because it looks like it's from a children's book or something, but it's got all these brutal scenes of like a guy getting his ass kicked and like slamming into a brick wall, and like you know what I mean, all this gnarly shit, and it's someone else being put through a fucking torture device.
Yeah.
But it looks like it's from a children's book.
And none of their records went in this direction ever. It's like, I don't know, that's why I'm so interested in it. I think it's a great record on top of everything else, but also, why did the band write an album like this? Like, why did their creative energy go into such a dark path?
Can we get Diamond Dave on the show?
I'll work on it, man. Can you imagine that? That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Or Michael Anthony? What's Michael Anthony doing? He's hanging out, right?
I mean, he's not even in Van Halen right now.
Yeah, no, and I think Chickenfoot is done, or whatever the name of that stupid band was.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
Yeah.
I put that out of my mind, actually.
So he might be around, man. Maybe he'll be down to talk. He can give us some insight.
You know, it's funny though. David Lee Roth strikes me as the kind of guy though, if, say, I was ever able to like run into him somewhere and I was like, "Hey Dave, I feel like he's the kind of guy who would do something like that.
Yeah. And not only would he do it, I've interviewed Dave a long time ago, late 90s probably.
Oh, wow.
And he, not only would he probably do it, he would also, you could also probably go back after you've done your interview, you could probably go back and find quotes like the same, like he would have said the same thing that he said 30 years ago or almost 40 years ago about the record. Like he's been recycling his shit forever. His routine,
Yeah. Yeah.
Even in interviews.
Well, I've heard him on other podcasts many times. Like he was on the Joe Rogan Experience a couple times, and that's like one of my favorite episodes. And
yeah, I got to hear that one.
Yeah, he's like there's dudes who play music, like musicians, and then there's like entertainers. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Dave is cut from the same cloth as a guy like Frank Sinatra or like Dean Martin. Elvis, even, Little Richard, like these guys who are like, they're showmen, they're entertainers,
David Lee Roth could have existed on the vaudeville circuit and been a huge star back then. Like that's his style. Like, you know what I mean? I think you nailed it. Like he is an entertainer first and foremost. It happens to be, heavy rock music that because of the time and place that he was in, that's what he ended up doing. But it could have been anything. The guy's just a born entertainer,
And those fucking kicks, man.
Yeah.
That's a lifetime of doing like martial arts, man. That dude throws these fucking kicks, man. He's like fucking Bruce Lee or some shit, man.
Yeah, it's the splits are like painful to watch, but amazing.
Yeah, that's I never had that kind of flexibility, really,
No, neither. But I also never. But I also I should point out that I also never had. Like I watched that, and so here's the example. Like I would see Eddie Van Halen playing guitar, and I'd be like, wow, like I wish I could do that. That's impressive.
Yeah.
But I'd see David Lee Roth do those jumps and stuff, and I'd go like, wow, that's impressive. But it never occurred to me like, I wish I could do that. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just kind of instantly know. Like even with Eddie Van Halen, not like I could ever get close to becoming like that, but at least it seems like achievable somehow, But seeing like David Lee Roth jump off the thing, I'm like, I just even knew as a little kid, like I'll never do that ever. I won't even try to do that.
See, that's the thing about Eddie Van Halen, though, is like what you're saying. It's like I never felt like there's certain players out there that it does feel like it's out of your reach, that it's this divine talent,
Yeah. Yeah. No, but I mean, but that's what I mean. I'm not saying I could reach that level. I'm saying I think I had the desire. I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
I never wished I could jump. It was just the split thing just seemed so, it never even occurred to me that would be something I would try.
Yeah.
Where I would be like, I will spend 30 years trying and failing to get as good as Eddie Van Halen. You know what I mean?
Imagine if you could do those splits, though.
Yeah, no, are you kidding me? I would do them all the time.
Well, I think we've sufficiently covered this material here.
Yeah. Real proud of us.
Yeah, man, we did a great job. And thanks for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it, Jay.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me on the show.
That's it for this week's episode of Metal Matters, a Gimme Radio weekly podcast. Tune in next week and see what we have in store for you. The show is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Also, be sure to check out Jimi Radio, streaming on the web, iOS, or Android, for one of the best metal communities, exclusive merch, interviews with artists, and so much more. I'll catch you guys next week. Take care.
Just like I told you before, yeah, before, you know you're semi-good looking, and on the streets again. Oh yeah, you think you're really cooking, baby, you better find yourself a friend, my friend. It's something my love is right to the core. It's something my love, just like I told you before.